Welcome. My name is Hawk Jones, and I'll be the moderator for this Engineers Without Borders webinar, EWB-USA's Approach to Program Sustainability. This presentation is one of the core programs in the expanding series of online, on-demand continuing education programs created by Engineers Without Borders USA and presented by Contract Solutions Group. Before I turn the program over to our presenter, I'd like to make a couple of announcements regarding the program. As our program begins, you'll notice the program itself will fill the majority of your computer screen. On the lower left of your screen, you'll see a Pause Play button. If for any reason you need to pause the presentation, click once on the Pause button. To restart the program, simply click the Play arrow that will appear in the same place. If you need technical assistance, please click on the email link for Client Services at Contract Solutions Group, located on our website pages. Or you may call us for assistance from 7 a.m. Pacific Time until 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time, Monday through Fridays. If you are disconnected from the webinar due to local internet issues, simply log back in through the Engineers Without Borders website and restart the program. After the program, you'll be taken directly to the attendance reporting page. It is very important that you complete this short form and submit it immediately upon completion of the program to receive full credit for your participation in this program. If this step is bypassed, neither you nor your chapter will receive credit. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for the program, Joshua Knight, Project Manager with EWB-USA. Joshua earned his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Colorado and his master's degree from the University of South Carolina. He has 15 years' experience in water and wastewater environmental and sustainability engineering fields, which provides him with a unique perspective and knowledge base in his role of Project Manager with EWB-USA. In his role, Joshua provides guidance and technical assistance to volunteer chapters throughout the assessment, design, implementation, and monitoring process to ensure that the EWB-USA projects are sustainable and of high quality. Joshua, I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for agreeing to do this webinar on sustainability. And we will go through these slides, and you'll be able to review them afterwards. And we're here to talk about how to make your program more sustainable with EWB-USA. So what we're looking to do here is to help you have a program that is more sustainable. We want you to have this sustainability because it's going to mean that your partner community is going to get a better project. It's going to last for the long term. And it's also going to be better for your chapter. You're going to get more out of it. Okay, so first we want to look at, why is it that we put such a high importance on sustainability? Then we'll look at what exactly is it? How do we define sustainability here at Engineers Without Borders USA? Then we'll look at some lessons learned from other projects on what they've learned about sustainable projects. And then lastly, we'll look at some questions about a sustainable project, like a case study, and what are some commonalities between different projects that are sustainable. So it really goes right back to our mission on why we put such an emphasis on sustainable projects. And you can see it right here, but it's really, that's what we want. We want all of our projects to be sustainable projects. And it also comes into our vision in that when we can make a project that is sustainable, it's going to last for a long time for the community. It's going to be the right project for the community, and they will be able to take that and create more sustainable projects from there. So there are many different definitions for sustainability. We have taken 6 different characteristics that we've decided are important for sustainability for our projects here at EWB-USA. There are many different definitions, and these are just the ones that we've chosen to be more specific for our projects, and we'll go through each of these characteristics specifically. First of all is going to be performance, how the project rates against other similar projects and also other competing projects. So if you want to use one type of technology, how it's going to perform against other technologies that would do the same, would have the same role. Then we'll look at both environmental sustainability and ecosystem sustainability. Then we'll look at the economics of a project. We'll look at the social and cultural aspects of the project. And lastly, we'll look at how resilient is it, how long can it last. Okay, so first is performance. When you look at your project, you want to be looking at all the different possibilities for what you can do to get that project done. And you want to look at performance first to say, we want to ensure that what we want to do is as good or better than similar types of projects. And the way that we look at this, most importantly, is through alternatives analysis. So when you first go to a community, you'll do an assessment. And then when you come back, you'll do a post-assessment report. And that's moving you into the very next stage, which we look at as alternatives analysis. And we look at that as a 30% design stage. And at that point, we want for you to be taking all your alternatives and designing them up to the 30% design, or at least to the point where you know that a certain alternative is not the one that you want to go with. And that's where you're comparing the performance capabilities of each of the different alternatives. Now, when you go further, that's your 30% design. When you go further up to your 90% design, you're going to submit that design to what's called the Technical Advisory Committee, or the TAC. And they will review it as well for performance, as well as some other things. So that will be the second place where we'll be looking at performance specifically at EWB-USA from the national perspective. And then lastly, where we want you to always be looking at performance is in your monitoring and evaluation. So when you go out on, after you've finished a project, your construction complete, we need for you to go back out there and see how well it's doing. So we want you to prove the performance of the project and see how well it's done, and if there are any lessons learned as you move forward, or lessons learned for other chapters who would like to do a similar project. So for each of our different sustainability characteristics, we've got some places where there are some problems that we've seen. And so here's just a few examples with respect to performance. So biosand filters are a technology that many of our chapters like to look at. And what we've seen in the field is that there's the possibility that they work just great when you design them, but we have to make sure that you're actually checking them in the field, because many times if they're not implemented correctly, they will not work, and the performance is much different than what you had hoped for. So that's why we're looking at monitoring and evaluation, for example, to ensure that what you've put out there is actually doing what you expect it to. And then secondly is water supply. This is another common case that has to do with when a chapter goes out to the field. When you are assessing for a water supply, many times you'll be looking at the source to see how good is the source. What is the performance of the source, quantity-wise as well as quality-wise. And with respect to quantity, that can change over the year. If we take, for instance, a spring, and the performance of the spring is going to change between the dry and the wet seasons. And if you go there during the rainy season, or even at the very beginning of the dry season, you're going to have a very high flow. And if you base your design on that, you could very well end up with a supply that does not give you what you hope for during the dry season, which of course is the most important time of the year to be getting water to the community. So we really need for you to be getting actual data on how well your source is supplying water during all seasons of the year. And most importantly, if nothing else, at least during the height of the rainy season and at the end of the dry season, because those are the two times when you have the very highest and the very lowest flow from your water supply. Okay, so now we want to look at environmental sustainability. Here we want to look at exactly how is your project going to impact the environment. And many of our projects are inherently low impact on the environment, but we want you to specifically address this in your alternatives analysis. And we look at both the local and the global scale here. So is there any effluent that comes from your project? Is there anything that is a byproduct that the local environment is going to have to deal with? Or for that matter, is there anything to the global environment? And the big issue here is greenhouse gases. So have you done a full assessment of that? And we do not expect chapters to do a full life cycle analysis of each of the different alternatives. But if your chapter does have that expertise, that's definitely a great portion to add to your project to be able to look at the different alternatives. So I spoke a little bit of life cycle analysis, and this is kind of a little bit more specifics about that, and that is looking at a proposed technology from cradle to grave. So that would be looking at all the way from when your particular equipment is created to when it has to be disposed of. What kind of environmental impacts is that going to have? If you just look at different energy sources, for instance, and you're looking at solar versus the grid power, if you look at only right now, as in the operating phase of solar versus grid power, that's going to be a lot different from if you looked at it from the cradle to the grave, when they had to create those solar panels to when they have to be disposed of. So that's something that is definitely a good thing to have on your project. So the next thing is looking at ecosystem sustainability, which is we've made that a little different from environmental sustainability, and this is why. This is where we're looking at the just the surrounding local ecosystem around the project, and we look at this as it's not going to harm anything in the local biosystem. You don't want to have some effluent that's going to be killing the plants and animals that are right there that will receive any kind of effluent from your project. So a couple of examples here are a latrine project that is that has an effect on the groundwater that the community is also drawing from. So that is a direct effect that the chapter would need to address in the design of their project to know how close their latrine pit is to the local groundwater, how close are the different wells that are being used there or potential wells in the area, and if that would have any effect on that groundwater. And a second aspect is if you are taking water out of a stream or out of a out of a spring source, that water is not going to be going to that ecosystem. So this is something to address. There are, it doesn't mean you can't do a project if you're taking water out of an ecosystem, but that at least has to be something that you address as your design evolves. Okay, so our fourth aspect is dealing with the economics of a project. And this is something we would like for you to look at, not just for the operating phase, but the full cost pricing. So that means from the beginning, when the project is built, it's conceived, how much does it cost up front? Then looking at the operations of it, the maintenance of it, and then later on the repairs and any kind of expansion that you would have. Basically, you need for your system to pay for itself. And this is something that we are just now learning the hard way here in the U.S. with utilities needing to include the cost in their monthly fee that goes out to customers to be able to cover the cost for replacement of parts as they come to their term and need to be replaced. And that's something that all projects need to do. And if you've got a well project, perhaps not the replacement of the entire well, but at least for the replacement of the pump and all of the pipes and everything that comes with it, that should also include the cost for the personnel for any maintenance there. All of those costs should be put together. And if you say the lifetime of our project is going to be 20 years or 50 years or even 100 years, then you amortize that backwards and you know exactly how much it's going to cost per month for this project to pay for itself. And that should all be included to be able to make a sustainable project. Okay, so how do you look at this for your specific project? You need to know, for this project, can the community operate it? Can they maintain it? And are they going to be able to eventually replace that system without your help? If that's something that you can't answer yes to, you're going to need to look at an alternative solution. It may be a great idea, but if the community is going to need you to help them replace it, it's not a sustainable project. They have to be able to do that on their own. So as an example here, let's say you have a water system and you want to be able to utilize solar panels for pumping that water to the community. And if, let's say that they're stolen, which has definitely happened at our projects because solar panels are very expensive and people can utilize them, if they're stolen, what is the community going to do? Well, if they've already got it in their budget to be able to replace these things, then they'll have some funds to be able to replace them and get new solar panels out there. Another idea is slow sand filters. So if we've got a community where we're looking for them to contribute for it, and then you first put these filters in as let's say a prototype to just see how they're working, but you give them away for free. And then for the second half of the community, you're expecting for them to pay for it because you've realized that is the more sustainable way to go. Well, one problem we've had is that a community will refuse because you've set a precedent. The first half of the community received them for free, so the second half is going to expect them for free as well, and they will refuse to pay for them, which is a perfectly normal thing to expect. So you need to be thinking about these things from the very design of your project. You can't move too fast. You need to really realize that everything that you do out there is setting a precedent. So if you want to instill a prototype in community, that is perfectly fine, and we're great with that. Make sure that you do it such that when you want to do a full implementation, it will be along the same lines as that prototype. So if you want for them to eventually pay for a portion of this project, then they should be paid for the prototype as well. Okay. The next aspect has to do with the cultural, social acceptability of the project. And this has to do with making sure that the community is going to be okay with utilizing this specific technology, this specific project that you have for them. It should not be just a decision of you or even you and the non-governmental organization or your partner that you're working with in country. It should be of the community itself. They really want this project. They really want this specific technology. They're okay with it, and they'll utilize it. So how can you ensure that this happens? Well, first of all, it's a aspect that goes right back to our mission. We are a community-based organization. That means that we don't have a project in mind that we're just trying to find a community to give it to. We go to the community first, and we start with them. What is it that they need? What are their highest priorities? And it also goes to your non-governmental organization or your partner. You'll be working with them. They should be a local non-governmental organization that is there for the long term. So although we really are happy that the chapter can find some expatriate Americans to help them there in the field, like Peace Corps or missionaries or other groups, those are great. However, we need for you to be looking to local non-governmental organizations to be able to really understand the culture of that community, the language, the culture, the norms, so that they can be telling you if it's going to work. And to go further along that line, you'll need to be working with that community to have some kind of agreement, some kind of even written agreement. Some chapters use memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreements. Really what's important that the community, the NGO, and the chapter all sit down and they decide what are our commitments to this project and sign it. And when you do that, you're really getting the commitment of the different organizations on what exactly are they going to contribute and what exactly are they accepting from the project. Many communities may say they're happy to receive something, but until it's in writing that they really do want this, then it's kind of still ambiguous or vague about what they're agreeing to. So this makes it specific. And then lastly, education comes in here. So we're not saying that you have to use exactly the same thing that they've been using for centuries in this area. One great instance comes to mind of a composting latrine. So this happens to be a new thing in many areas. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to not do it. It just means that you will need to implement some education in the community before you're finalized with your design, even before you've decided on a specific design, to make sure that they're accepting of it. And maybe they need to understand better how this can be used. So with a composting latrine, for instance, they will need to be able to unload this latrine that used to be sewage and is now usable compost. They have to understand that they will need to take that out because that is the one step that chapters have difficulty with. And if they're not ready for that, then it is not the specific project for this community. But with education, you can overcome that, or at least there's the possibility that you can overcome that. Okay, so here's one example that we've had in a community that did not receive education or the buy-in from the community beforehand. The chapter had a great idea to come in and bring a stove that would lower the smoke inside village homes where they had their kitchen. However, the community was not ready for this. This was not something they wanted. And so they didn't take it. They decided to go back to their three stone fire, and the chapter was very dismayed. But they learned that they had not had that buy-in from the get-go. So that was something that we definitely need to do and not repeat their problem. Okay. So the last aspect of sustainability that Engineers Without Borders USA looks at is resilience. And that basically means how well will this project stand up? Not just to time, although that's definitely the most important aspect, but to all kinds of issues, both internal and external. Internal issues, what if you have a water project and there is strife within the water committee? What if there's some misappropriation of funds? How can your project deal with that? How will you still be able to get water to the community? External pressures as well. What if there's water that's fed by snowmelt that is no longer coming to the community because there's just lack lack of precipitation in this area caused by climate change over time. These are things to be looking at and to be ready for. Another one would be extreme events coming into the community. How can you deal with typhoons, all of these things that may have an effect in the future that are not there right when you happen to be making your project. And another thing is looking at codes for your local community, for your local country. Many of them will talk about this. You can also use codes from your local community here in the States, if there's not one there in country, on how to deal with extreme events and how to be looking at ensuring that your project will last for the long term. Okay, so to step back a little bit, we talked a little bit up front about how there are so many definitions of sustainability, and how do we, now that we've got these different aspects for characteristics for measuring our program, how do we get into exactly how do we do each program and how do we measure our own sustainability? Well, it's going to be different per project, so we don't have any specific rules for how exactly you have to do it. That's what we want for you to work with on your project, to find out how are we going to meet these 6 characteristics. How are we going to measure if it's a sustainable project or not. And also when we look at going into alternatives analysis, what are the most important characteristics? Are there any that are more important than others? Perhaps they are. To just arbitrarily give equal weight to each of these 6 sustainability characteristics, I don't think is correct. You really should decide for your project, are economics the most important aspect? Are cultural acceptability, is that the most important aspect? And give them a little bit more weight. Or perhaps they should all have equal weight. But really that's something that you need to walk through and decide, are these all equal weight? If so, why is that? Justify whatever your decision is, how you're going to weigh the different aspects. Okay, so now we're going to look at a few lessons learned that came from different projects and what they've gotten out of it to move forward and for you to gain so that you wouldn't make some of the same mistakes that they have. And if this were a live webinar, we would be asking you for some of your own lessons learned. But since it's not, we've just listed a few from other projects that we've had in our past. And we'll kind of walk through a few of these. And I'll go through these fairly quickly. And you'll have this webinar, and you can go back and kind of look at it a little more detailed if you see that for your specific project there's some things that you noticed that you would like to get a little bit more information on. And of course you can always write us or call us here at the national office, and we can give you some more specific information or lessons learned about your particular project. So one that we've got here is in Rwanda, where we had a water pipeline. There was a neighboring community that was having some problems with the specific community that our chapter was working with, and they proceeded to dig out the pipelines that, or dig down to the pipelines where the project was, and there was some fear that there was going to be some kind of contamination of the water system from this neighboring community. Well, you know, this is definitely an issue that the chapter needs to be concerned about from the outset. What are the relationships among the different communities nearby, and is there any kind of issues that we're going to need to walk through and address? Can we do it technically? Do we have to work with these different communities and maybe do some education? What are the politics here that we need to work with to ensure that the project is going to be sustainable for the long term from all different perspectives? Okay, so in Peru we had a biosand filter project, which we've had in many different places. And in this particular area, a chapter had thought this would be a great idea and it perhaps would have been a great idea, but they weren't able to source their materials locally. And for something that seems as simple as sand, it seems like it may be everywhere, but obviously it's not. And in this case, there was a problem that they could not get sand locally, and it could only come from a faraway source that was very expensive, and it made the cost of their project increase so that it was too expensive, and it would not have competed well with other projects, other types of technologies, if it had been looked at thoroughly up front. So this is what we need you to do on your assessment trips. And that's why we always push for you to have a longer assessment in the community. Even 2-3 weeks, I'll hear chapters saying that they didn't have enough time to get all the information they needed. And sometimes, or a lot of times, they will not realize this till they've gotten to their design stage and they don't have the information they need to make all of their design decisions. And that's exactly why we look at you to have a professional mentor with advanced 3 to 7 years of experience in the field, post-bachelor, non-academic experience, where they've been constructing and designing the type of technology, or at least the field that you're working in. So for water supply, for instance, we wouldn't be asking for you to have someone with 7 years of rainwater experience, but at least someone with water supply experience that can walk through the design, and they will know up front what kind of information we need to be gathering on your assessment so that you can be doing your design, a thorough design, when you come back here to the United States, because it's so much more difficult to get that information once you're here. So really, the assessment is so important, and that's why we want you to be so prepared and go there for a long enough amount of time to get all of this information you'll need. Okay, so here is an idea of one specific project that is a hypothetical situation that that you are going into the field and you would like to adopt a project. You know a little bit about it, and you have some questions that you'll want to be able to answer before you'll know if you're going to have a sustainable project. So we're looking at a project that, let's say you have the application from the community, so you've got a little bit of information from them, and you want to assess just how sustainable can this project be, or better yet, no project is going to be perfect. So you just want to know, how can I find out the information I need to make it a more sustainable project? And perhaps it's not a possibility to make it a sustainable project at this time, but that's something you'll want to know and you'll want to find out the information for. So here's some just basic information that we'll assume that you have up front, and then we'll decide how can we move forward to get the rest of the information we need. So we know that it's a water supply project. We know that right now they are getting their water from a borehole. So from a dug hole in the community where they are retrieving water. We don't know what the water quality is specifically. We hear from the community that it is bad quality, but they don't have any specific information either. And then we know nothing about the climate, or at least that's not in the project application. That'll be something the chapter will need to find out. The non-governmental organization, we don't know anything about, so they're new to us. And then the community capacity, we have no idea because we've never been there, we've never contacted the community. So now let's move to the next step. How can we find out if this can be a sustainable project for us? So there are many questions here that we've listed. There are definitely more, and I'm not going to go into detail on any of the specific questions here. I just kind of listed several here that you can be thinking of. And let me stop here for a moment to take a drink. Okay, thank you. So we'll look at the 6 characteristics of sustainability. and what you can be doing to try to move towards sustainability. So first of all, with performance, we know of the source that they have, but I want you to look at all of the different possible water sources. And for any project, that should be assessed. And let's say they're getting it now from underground, from a borehole. Well, let's look at spring sources. Let's look at above ground sources. Maybe there's a nearby pond or lake or a stream. Let's look at rainwater. Let's look at maybe a deep groundwater hole. All of these things need to be reviewed as you move forward in your alternatives analysis. You may know that this is the best alternative, but none of us do, and the Technical Advisory Committee is going to be asking you that when you get to that final design stage. And it would be horrible that you have one specific alternative that you've designed all the way through to 90%, and you have a full design professional package that you're ready to move forward with, and then all of a sudden we ask you, well, have you thought of groundwater? And you can't say that you have. This is not something that you want to do at your final design stage. You need to be doing this up front. So on your first assessment trip, you need to look at all the possible sources. Or if it's not water, what are all the different technologies that we can use to address our particular problem? Okay, and then you want to look at, what are other communities in the region, or what are other communities in this country doing to address this specific problem? How are they dealing with it? Most likely, that's going to be the best way, or at least a highly competitive way to address the problem that you're dealing with. So you'll want to look at other communities and how they're working with your problem. And then also, if there have been any problems with those other projects, those are great lessons learned that you can not repeat if you've studied them well and you know what their problem was. And then for your specific project, what is the experience of your technical lead for a professional chapter or your professional mentor for a student chapter? Is it applicable to this project? Perhaps on the outset you thought that they were the correct professional mentor, but at this point it looks like it's turned a little bit and they don't have specific expertise. You're going to need to find someone else that can do that for you. And then also, we'll be asking you about metrics. How can you measure the success of your project? You want to be thinking about this from the outset. If it is a water project, like our example here, different things to look at would be very simple ones, like water quality. We want to ensure that it meets World Health Organization standards. We want to reduce the E. coli contamination down to 0 counts per 100 milliliters. For quantity, we want to make sure that there is 30 gallons per person per day for 20 years. Or, very simple things. But we'll want you to be looking at that from your assessment stage, and definitely as you get into the implementation. How are we going to measure it? And obviously, these are things that you can be making better as you move along, and that's definitely not a problem, but we'll want to see those up front. And then also, what are the local technical experts that are there? Have you found people that have solved this problem in nearby communities? If it's a water problem, there's definitely going to be someone in the area who is fixing this problem. How have we gotten a hold of them? Can they come out to the site? What we'd really like for you to do on your first assessment, to have those technical experts meet you in the field. They can tell you, here's your problem, here's how you would fix it, and here's what I would do if you were to pay me to fix it. And I tell you what, this is how much it would cost if you wanted me to fix it for you. These are the kind of people that we like to see in the field. We like to see how they would address the problem. And we're not a funding organization only. We would not look to just fund these technical experts, but we definitely like for you to be working with them. And they could be like a contract oversight manager to be working with the chapter. If you've started a project with them and your phase isn't quite complete when you finish, they can be someone who can stay there in the community to finish that end of that phase for you. And you've built that trust because they've been there from your assessment stage, and you know them, and you've seen their work, and you know that they do good jobs in other communities. Okay, and then we move on to environmental sustainability. Again, for this specific example, what is the different water quality? What is the water quality of the different sources for groundwater, for springs, for surface water, for even in the homes, if they're storing in their homes, what is that water quality? All of this should be reviewed in your assessment. And then what is the effect of different power sources, not just funding options, but also you can be looking at greenhouse gas emissions and any kind of emissions from those power sources on the environment. And again, it would be great if a full life cycle analysis of all of your options has been completed, and then if there's any effluent, from your different water treatment option, what kind of waste comes from that system. And then for the ecosystem surrounding your project, is there any water that you're removing from the ecosystem? What kind of effect will that have on that? Are there going to be plants or animals that are impacted by that? And is there any way that you can mitigate that impact to minimize the impact on the surrounding ecosystem? And then, is it economically sustainable? One thing that we would like to see for every water project is a water committee or a water board. They should be in place. They should be working. They should be collecting fees for the water system and for any possible electrical system is there. Also to pay for any kind of maintenance. If there's a caretaker for the project, there should be some funds there for that person. And secondly, they will need to contribute a portion of the cash, materials, and labor up front for the project. This is really how we ensure the ownership of a project. And this is something that we get into more in other aspects of a project. But really, when you look at ownership for a project, how do you ensure sustainability? One of the strongest aspects is ownership from the local community. And if you take a step back from that, how can you ensure ownership of a project? And that is by getting buy-in into the project. And that comes from three aspects: from the cash perspective, from the materials perspective, and the labor perspective. And many chapters will say, well, our community is poor, they don't have cash. It's true. All of our communities are poor, however. Otherwise, we wouldn't be there. And the fact that they don't have cash is for sure. But at the same time, communities do pay for not having water or for not having high-quality water. They're already paying. If their infant gets sick, they will pay to take that infant to the hospital, and they are paying that right now. To say that they can't pay for a new water project because they're not paying now because it's free now, it's just not true. They're paying for the bad quality water they have. And maybe if they're adults, they're not going to the hospital and they're trying to save that money, but they're still having to sit at home because they're sick and they're not working in their fields. So people do pay for bad quality water. And this is just moving that to a more formal, here's how we're going to prevent these illnesses. And that goes back to education. The community may need to have some education from the chapter about, what are the costs that we're currently paying, and why would we want to pay for a new water project? Why would we want to pay some aspect of the current project? It also goes into value. We just simply, as human beings, we do not value things we don't pay for. The aspect that has been that I heard when I was working in Cameroon as a missionary is simply that if you give your son a motorcycle, or if your son works every day and he purchases that motorcycle himself, which motorcycle is going to be maintained better? Obviously the one that your son bought with his own cash. And that goes the same here. We're not looking for a lot from the community, something as small as 5-10% in cash, as well as more in materials and labor, hopefully getting up over 25, perhaps 40% total that the community can give to the project. This is the key for sustainability. If the community has got that economic buy-in, has got that ownership of the project, this is what we hope for from the community. So, not to belabor that point too much, but that is a great aspect for ensuring sustainability. But lastly, for economics, can everything be purchased locally? This is what we require for all of our projects, is that things are sourced locally. That means it could very well come from the United States, but it should be sourced. It should be purchased from a local source, because that's how they will have to do it after you leave. And frankly, some chapters come to me and say, hey, we can get these solar panels for free, and all we have to do is ship them. And if we got them in community, it would be so much more expensive. Well, you know, that's just not something that we do. They have to come from the community because that's where they're going to have to come after they break down, and they can't be expecting for the chapter to come out and replace them. And also it has to deal, I'm sorry, I had a screensaver take over there. I'm talking too long. We had a chapter who can get things very cheaply or for free from the U.S., but when you can't get them locally, they can't replace them locally, and also they may be they may not fit the parts that are there locally, because they may be on an American system and the parts locally are metric, or for all kinds of different reasons. We really need for everything to be sourced locally from the community or from the country. Okay, so is it accepted by the community? You'll want to look at what are the priorities of the community, and is this one of the highest priorities? That's why we go out on assessment. We ask you to be looking to the community to give you their highest priorities that they want. This is the community-driven aspect of our projects. We don't look for you to be going to several different communities and giving them your pet project or the one where you have the most expertise. What we're asking you to do is to find out their highest priorities and working to give them projects that meet their highest priorities. That may not necessarily be the highest priority project first. Many chapters will look at doing a smaller project. Perhaps the highest priority is water, but it looks like it will be a very involved, complex, expensive project, and the chapter would like to start with one that's a little bit simpler, but it's still on high on the priorities list of the community. That is perfectly fine. But we don't want you to be doing something that's just completely new to the community, and they really have not listed that as a high priority. Will everyone be able to access the project for our own water project here? Will everyone be getting water? Are there going to be people who don't receive water? And if so, why is that? They should all be receiving water. We look at equality, and we look at everyone getting the same price to have access to projects here in the U.S. That's really not something that's necessarily required in other communities. It could very well be that tiered pricing is the way to go, and that would be where perhaps the richer members of the community are subsidizing those who are poor, who do not have a job, who have no income. That is perfectly fine, and we actually would prefer that, that there be some kind of subsidy for those who can't pay for the project. As far as an NGO, are they able to assist the chapter while you're not there? It's very difficult for a chapter to provide all of the education for a community, and if you can have a partner there in country to be doing that while you're gone, that is really one of the best ways to go. And that's something that we'll be looking at as you move forward. They can also be your eyes and ears on the ground while you're not there, to be able to get you information and let you know if things are not going well for the project. Lastly, we're looking at resilience. For this specific project, what about other projects, other similar projects? Have they worked well in other communities? Is this a technology that is brand new? We definitely do not look for that in communities. We look for technologies that have been well proven. There are other organizations that look to do new technologies. We are not one of them. We want you to be implementing projects that have been proven in other communities that will work for the long term. Also, we want for you to look at any kind of pressures that could come on the project, internal and external, and how will you deal with those? How are you going to minimize the risk to the project not moving forward? Okay, so that is a little bit of an overview for one specific kind of project, a water project, but that's one of the majority of types of projects that we see here at Engineers Without Borders, and we've looked at how can we address the different aspects of sustainability for this type of project. And for other types of projects, many similar types of questions will come into play. But now we'd like to look at just a few aspects of what kind of things have made successful projects work. And these kind of go along the lines for all different types of projects. And I'll kind of go through these quickly. You can review them later on. We already spoke of having a very good engaged local NGO or partnering organization to be there for you and give you information about the project while you're not there. We'll want you to look at all different aspects of the project. Behavioral aspects would have to do of that community buy-in. Are they going to utilize the project? For instance, we spoke of latrines earlier. Maybe they have a specific type of latrine that they use that they will simply not use any other kind. So you'll need to be looking at that as you move forward. Looking at health assessments, these aren't necessarily required, but if you are doing a health assessment, it's great to do that before and after your project implementation to see the improvement. Also, problem assessments we definitely would like for you to do to see where they think their problems are, what kind of things they're looking at. And we emphasize problems because you don't want to be asking them up front, what are the solutions? In other words, we don't want to ask them a needs assessment. In other words, what do you need? Do you need a water project? Do you need a school? But what are their problems? What are the underlying problems that cause these needs so that you can be thinking of different ways to address them? So maybe it's sickness, and you can be looking at what kinds of sickness. Are they related to water? Or perhaps it's that they can't get jobs and they need a school. Well, what is the literacy rate? We can be looking at those kinds of problems. Okay, next we'll look at how can you communicate with the community? How can you communicate with your partnering organization? How can you be communicating with local vendors who can supply you materials? All of these things you should be looking at up front, even before you go the first time at assessment. But on your assessment, you should really be solidifying very good, solid lines of communication. And, any kind of communication is great. So we think that email here in the U.S. is really primary, but it's really not so in other countries. And so you need to be thinking about telephone and different ways of getting a hold of people after you go. Okay, and then we can look at the local tongue in the community. The best thing, obviously, is to have members on your team go out there that can speak the local language, or at least translators from the area. Many chapters have utilized their local non-governmental organization for translators. That's great. An even better idea is to be getting people from that community to really be pulling them in for working on this project. That can be part of their community contribution to be providing translators. We also look to you to, it's great to at least know the greetings in the local tongue so that you can show that you're putting forth an effort to be a part of the community. Okay, and then looking at the locals being a part of every phase of the project from the very beginning through the very end is something we'd like to see. Okay, we look at having different mentors or leads on a project. Not just one lead or mentor, but for every aspect that's important that goes to your project. With respect to a water project, there are many different areas of expertise that you may need. Several of them are listed here, but it's definitely something that's project specific, but you'll need someone for each aspect there. We look at that community contribution that we spoke of earlier, and I say here is in the bank. That's something that that successful chapters have found, that it's not just something that they keep the funds themselves, but they are willing to take that extra step forward, and they can put it into a bank account that's really saying, hey, we're serious. And the chapter can even utilize that to say, that's the one aspect, the one card the chapter has is that is their implementation. And when they can say, as soon as we see those funds in the bank account, then we're ready to come out. We have our design ready. And so for whatever's on your memorandum of understanding, your agreement with the community, once those needs have been met, those commitments from the community, then you're ready to come out, but not before. And in the bank, that can be a bank account that you share locally with community. That's chapters have definitely done that, where they put their funds in, the community puts their funds in, and then once they get there, that's where all the materials come from. Another aspect is that teams return to the project for monitoring or evaluation. This is something we do require for closing out a project, to go there at least once 1 year after you go. But it's great to go year after year to see how well the project is doing, and to be doing small corrections to the project if there's some problems there. And also we'll see great chapters go out for very small phases. And they go out there with enough time to be able to do a specific phase, and they've even got contingency in there, 1, 2, 3, several days, in case something goes wrong. And we all know that there are problems here in the U.S. and more so on the other side of the world. So it's definitely good to not bite off more than you can chew. And also, as we spoke of earlier, you want the community to be a part of it, especially there at the construction phase. Okay, so this is kind of a synopsis, a summary of some of the things we found most important for sustainability. We thank you very much for taking part in this webinar. We wish you the very best with having the most sustainable project. We look forward to hearing from you. We definitely want to make this model better, and we need your input to do that. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Joshua, and thanks to our participants for your attention. I want to take this opportunity to once again remind our participants that you must complete and submit your attendance on the following webpage to receive credit for attending this program. This concludes today's program, EWB-USA's Approach to Program Sustainability, brought to you by Engineers Without Borders USA and Contract Solutions Group. Please check our online catalog for the latest instructional programming from EWB-USA at Contract Solutions Group. This program is copyright 2010 by EWB-USA, all rights reserved. Thank you for joining us for this program, and enjoy the rest of your day.